My name is Natalie, and I am 32 years old. The elegant wedding reception of my sister-in-law Heather turned into a nightmare when she mockingly asked me to clean tables. My mother Elizabeth called my 10-year-old son Jacob brainless, causing cruel laughter. But nobody expected my dyslexic yet brilliant son to grab the microphone and shock the entire room with what he revealed next. If you are watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you are from, and do not forget to like and subscribe to hear what happened next at this disastrous wedding. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, my relationship with my brother Benjamin was complicated from the start. Benjamin was 4 years older, always commanding attention and getting his way. Even as children, the dynamics in our family were clear. Benjamin was our mother Elizabeth's favorite, while I shared a special bond with our father Robert. Robert was a kind-hearted man who owned a successful local furniture business. He worked hard his entire life, building his company from scratch, after inheriting just a small workshop from his own father. Despite his growing success, he remained humble and focused on family values rather than material possessions. He always told me, "Natalie, wealth is meaningless without character." Those words shaped who I became. My father and I connected through our shared love of books and quiet conversations. We would spend Sunday afternoons in his study, discussing everything from classic literature to my dreams for the future. He listened to me in a way no one else did, making me feel valued and understood. Benjamin never had patience for these conversations, preferring to focus on the practical aspects of the family business that he expected to inherit someday. When Benjamin met Heather in college, their connection was immediate. She came from a family that valued status and appearance above all else, traits that eventually revealed themselves in increasingly uncomfortable ways. At family gatherings, Heather would subtly comment on my modest clothing or our smaller home, always finding ways to emphasize the difference in our financial situations. After college, I met Daniel, a high school math teacher with a gentle soul and unwavering moral compass. We fell in love, quickly sharing dreams of a simple but meaningful life. Within 2 years, we were married in a small ceremony that Benjamin and Heather barely acknowledged, claiming a business emergency prevented their attendance. My father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, whispering how proud he was of the woman I had become. When our son Jacob was born, our family felt complete. He was a curious, sensitive child, with expressive blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. By the time he reached first grade, however, we noticed he struggled with reading and writing. After several evaluations, Jacob was diagnosed with dyslexia. The diagnosis was challenging, but Daniel and I were determined to support our son and help him navigate a world that often misunderstood his brilliant mind. Jacob might have struggled with reading, but he displayed remarkable talents in other areas. His spatial reasoning skills were exceptional, and he could solve complex puzzles that left even Daniel, a mathematics teacher, impressed. He had an incredible memory for details he heard, compensating for his reading difficulties by developing extraordinary listening skills. Unfortunately, Benjamin and Heather saw only his challenges, not his gifts. When Jacob was 8, we attended a family Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' home. Jacob was proudly showing everyone a complex model airplane he had built entirely on his own. Rather than acknowledging his achievement, Heather whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Shame. He can build toys, but cannot read a simple book. Perhaps your teaching methods are as basic as your lifestyle, Daniel." The room fell silent as Jacob's smile faded. My father immediately stood up, placed his hand on Jacob's shoulder, and announced how impressed he was with his grandson's engineering skills. He then took Jacob to his workshop, where they spent the rest of the evening working on projects together. That moment cemented the special bond between my father and my son, a relationship that brought joy to both of them. As my father's business continued to prosper, Benjamin became increasingly involved in the company operations. He worked alongside our father, learning the business aspects while I pursued a career in elementary school administration. Despite our different paths, Our father made it clear that he valued both of our contributions to the family in different ways. When Jacob turned 9, my father took me aside during a family gathering. "I have updated my will, Natalie," he said quietly. "I want you to know that everything will be divided equally between you and your brother. I know money has never motivated you, but I want to ensure Jacob's future, especially for his education. He has special gifts that need nurturing." I assured him that Daniel and I were managing fine, but he insisted. "It is not about need, Natalie. It is about fairness, and recognizing that family legacy belongs to all of us equally." I hugged him, grateful for his foresight and fairness, never imagining how quickly our lives would change. Our modest but happy life continued. We lived in a small 3-bedroom house in a family-friendly neighborhood. Daniel taught at the local high school, and I worked as an assistant principal at an elementary school. We were not wealthy by any means, but we had enough to provide Jacob with the educational support he needed while still enjoying occasional family vacations to nearby lakes and national parks. Little did I know that my father's decision about his will would soon become the catalyst for exposing the true nature of my brother and his wife, forever altering our family dynamics in ways none of us could have predicted. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was in a meeting with parents discussing a new reading program when my phone vibrated persistently in my pocket. Seeing my mother's number flash across the screen multiple times, I excused myself. Elizabeth's voice trembled as she delivered the devastating news. "Your father collapsed at the store. Heart attack." The ambulance came, but he is gone, Natalie. Robert is gone. The world stopped spinning. My father, my rock, my greatest supporter, was suddenly gone, at just 63 years old. The man who had taught me resilience, kindness, and integrity had left us without warning or goodbye. The following days passed in a blur of arrangements and grief. Daniel handled most of the funeral preparations while I moved through each day in a fog of disbelief. Jacob, though only 10, showed remarkable strength, helping me select photos for the memorial display, and even writing a short poem to read at the service. The funeral was held at the same church where I had been married. The building overflowed with people whose lives my father had touched: employees, business associates, neighbors, and friends. Benjamin delivered a formal eulogy, highlighting our father's business accomplishments, while I shared personal stories about his kindness and wisdom. Throughout the service, I noticed Benjamin and Heather huddled with Heather's father, Harold, a corporate attorney, frequently checking their phones and whispering during the most solemn moments. Following the funeral, we gathered at my parents' home for the reading of the will. My father's longtime attorney and friend Lawrence looked uncomfortable as he prepared to address the family. Benjamin sat straight-backed beside Heather, both dressed in expensive, perfectly tailored black attire that somehow seemed more appropriate for a business meeting than a family gathering in mourning. "Before I begin, Lawrence said I want to emphasize that Robert was of completely sound mind when we updated this will last year. He was very clear about his wishes." Lawrence proceeded to read the will, confirming what my father had told me: the family home would remain with our mother during her lifetime. His business assets would be placed in a trust, with both Benjamin and me as equal beneficiaries, and his personal savings and investments would be divided equally between his 2 children. The moment Lawrence finished reading, Benjamin stood up, his face flushed with anger. "This cannot be right," he declared. "I have dedicated the last 10 years to growing the business, while Natalie pursued her own career. Father and I had an understanding that I would inherit the company." "That was never discussed with me," Lawrence replied calmly. "Robert was explicit about equal division." Heather jumped in, her voice sharp. "Natalie clearly manipulated Robert in his final years. She paraded that child around, using his disability to gain sympathy and financial advantage." The accusation struck like a physical blow. Using Jacob, my father and son had shared a genuine bond based on mutual respect and love. "How dare you?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "My father loved Jacob for who he is. This has nothing to do with manipulation." Benjamin paced the room. Father was not thinking clearly. His judgment was compromised by age and sentiment. "I will contest this will." To my shock, my mother nodded in agreement. "Benjamin has sacrificed everything for the family business," Elizabeth said, avoiding my eyes. "Robert was always soft on Natalie. Perhaps he was not thinking practically." The room temperature seemed to drop as the lines were drawn. My mother, who should have been a unifying force in our time of grief, had chosen a side, and it was not mine. Over the following weeks, Benjamin followed through on his threat. He hired a prestigious law firm specializing in estate disputes, claiming our father had been unduly influenced and was not mentally competent when updating his will. Heather spread rumors throughout our extended family and social circle that I had manipulated a vulnerable old man, painting me as a calculating daughter who had used her child's learning disability to secure an inheritance I did not deserve. Most painful was my mother's betrayal. Elizabeth not only supported Benjamin's claims, but actively provided statements to his attorneys, suggesting that our father had shown signs of diminished capacity in his final year, a complete fabrication that broke my LOA heart. As the legal battle intensified, our personal lives began to unravel. Daniel was unexpectedly laid off from his teaching position due to budget cuts. I later learned through a colleague that Benjamin had spoken to a school board member, suggesting Daniel's teaching methods were outdated and questioning his competence. While I could not prove the connection, the timing seemed far too convenient. With Daniel unemployed and legal fees mounting, our financial situation became precarious. Jacob's specialized tutoring and educational support services were expensive, and our savings were quickly depleting. The stress began affecting all of us. Daniel spent his days sending out job applications and attending interviews that went nowhere. I took on extra responsibilities at work, hoping for a raise that never materialized. Jacob, sensitive to the tension in our home, began having trouble sleeping and became increasingly anxious about his schoolwork. One evening, as Daniel and I discussed our options at the kitchen table, after Jacob had gone to bed, I made a decision that would change everything. "I want to drop the legal fight," I said quietly. "We cannot afford this battle financially or emotionally." Daniel looked concerned. "But that money is rightfully yours, and more importantly, Jacob's future security." I reached for his hand. "My father taught me that peace of mind is worth more than any inheritance. Jacob needs parents who are present and emotionally available more than he needs money in a trust fund. Benjamin can have the business and the money. I just want our family to heal." The next day, I called my attorney and instructed him to withdraw our opposition to Benjamin's petition. When I signed the settlement papers relinquishing my claim to my father's estate, I felt a strange mixture of loss and liberation. Benjamin and Heather had won the battle for material wealth, but in that moment, I chose a different kind of richness: integrity, peace, and family unity. Within weeks, Benjamin and Heather moved into my childhood home, persuading my mother to transfer the deed to them with the promise that she could live there for the rest of her life. They quickly took control of my father's business, rebranding it with a modern logo that erased any trace of my father's original vision. The family heirlooms I had hoped to preserve as connections to my father, his collection of first edition books, the antique pocket watch his father had given him, the hand-carved chess set we had played with every Sunday, all remained in the house, now claimed as Benjamin and Heather's property. I walked away from it, all determined to rebuild our lives, with the values my father had truly stood for, not the material possessions that had come to represent his legacy in Benjamin's eyes. The first few months after surrendering my inheritance were brutal. We downsized from our modest house to a 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable school district. The moving day was particularly painful, watching the movers squeeze our furniture into a space half the size of our previous home, while Jacob silently carried his belongings in small, careful trips up 3 flights of stairs. "Is this going to be forever, Mom?" he asked that night, sitting on his bed, surrounded by unpacked boxes. "No, honey," I assured him, though uncertainty gnawed at me. "This is just a transition period while Dad finds a new teaching position." Daniel had been applying for jobs relentlessly, but the local teaching market was competitive, and the whispers Benjamin had spread about his competence seemed to follow him. He eventually took a position as a substitute teacher, work that paid less than half his previous salary and offered no benefits. To supplement our income, he also began tutoring students in mathematics on evenings and weekends. I took on additional administrative duties at my school, often staying until 7 or 8 at night to complete paperwork and planning. The principal, sympathetic to our situation, approved as much overtime as the budget allowed. Still, our combined income barely covered our basic expenses, and Jacob's specialized tutoring. Meanwhile, Benjamin and Heather wasted no time, flaunting their newfound wealth. Benjamin expanded the furniture business, opening 2 new locations within 6 months. Heather quit her job as a marketing executive to become a lifestyle influencer, regularly posting photos of their lavish home renovations, exotic vacations, and expensive jewelry on social media. "Just received the most amazing anniversary gift from my adoring husband," she captioned one post, showcasing a diamond bracelet that probably cost more than our annual rent. "So blessed to have married into a family legacy of success and vision." The family legacy she referred to was my father's life work, now repurposed as a backdrop for her carefully curated online persona. Each post was like a knife twist, not because of the material possessions themselves, but because of how completely they had erased my father's genuine values of modesty and substance over style. Most painful were the family gatherings we still occasionally attended primarily for Jacob's sake and to maintain a relationship with my mother. During a Thanksgiving dinner at what had once been my childhood home, Benjamin gave a toast about continuing the family tradition of excellence while standing beneath a massive new portrait of himself in the spot where my father's praised photograph had once hung. Later that evening, I overheard Heather telling guests about their plans to completely renovate the master bedroom. Finally getting rid of that outdated furniture Robert insisted on keeping. "Benjamin has such better taste." The outdated furniture included the bedroom set my father had crafted by hand as a wedding gift for my mother 40 years earlier. Each piece had been lovingly designed and built over the course of a year. Now, it would likely end up in a dumpster, another piece of my father's legacy discarded. Jacob's struggles intensified during this period. The new school did not have the resources to properly support his learning needs, and the other students were not as accepting of his differences. Benjamin's son Andrew attended the same school and regularly belittled Jacob, telling classmates about his dumb cousin who cannot even read properly. One afternoon, I received a call from the school counselor. Jacob had been found hiding in the bathroom during lunch period, refusing to come out. When I arrived to pick him up, his eyes were red from crying. Andrew told everyone, "I am only at this school because we are too poor to afford a good school," he explained in the car ride home. He said Uncle Benjamin had to give us charity because Dad cannot keep a job. Daniel and I spent that evening reassuring Jacob of his worth and intelligence, emphasizing that our current financial situation was temporary. But the damage to his self-confidence was evident in the following weeks as he became more withdrawn and reluctant to attend school. To afford Jacob's specialized tutoring, I took a second job working weekend shifts at a local bookstore. The irony was not lost on me, spending my days surrounded by books while helping my son who struggled with reading. But the quiet hours shelving and organizing became a small sanctuary, a place where I could process my grief over not just my father's death, but the loss of the family I thought we had been. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continued to distance herself from us while growing closer to Benjamin and Heather. She rarely visited our apartment, claiming the stairs were too difficult for her knees, but had no trouble accompanying Benjamin and Heather on their weekend trips to their newly purchased lake house. When she did see Jacob, her interactions were stilted and formal, nothing like the warm grandmother she had once been. "Why does Grandma not like us anymore?" Jacob asked after one particularly brief and uncomfortable visit. I struggled to find an appropriate answer. "Grandma is going through a difficult time since Grandpa died. Sometimes people change when they are sad." The truth was more complex and painful. Elizabeth had chosen status and comfort over fairness and truth. The son who provided luxury and social standing had become her priority, while the daughter who reminded her of the husband she had lost, and perhaps of her own complicity in dishonoring his wishes, was easier to avoid. 6 months after giving up my inheritance, I discovered something that shook me to my core. While helping a colleague research local business registrations for a school project, I stumbled upon the incorporation documents for my father's company's expansion. The dates on the paperwork predated my father's death by several months, yet contained his signature on papers he could not possibly have signed. With trembling hands, I made copies of the documents, uncertain what to do with this information. Confronting Benjamin would likely lead nowhere. He would deny everything, and I had no resources to pursue legal action. The revelation sat heavily in my chest, the knowledge that my brother had not just taken what should have been shared, but had likely committed fraud to do so. That night, I showed the papers to Daniel, who confirmed my suspicions about the timeline discrepancies. "This is forgery, Natalie. We should report this." But I hesitated. To what end? We cannot afford more legal battles. Benjamin has all the resources, all the connections. "It is not about getting the money back," Daniel argued. "It is about what is right." I placed the papers in a folder and tucked them away in our small home office. "I need time to think about this. Right now we need to focus on keeping our family afloat." As winter turned to spring, our situation improved marginally. Daniel secured a full-time teaching position at a school 30 miles away, a difficult commute, but steady employment, with benefits that would resume in the fall. I received a small promotion at work that came with a modest salary increase. We began to adapt to our new reality, finding moments of joy despite our circumstances. Jacob, resilient in ways that continually amazed me, developed coping strategies for school, and even joined the science club, where his exceptional spatial reasoning skills made him a valuable team member for their engineering challenges. When his team won a regional competition, the pride on his face reminded me of my father's expression whenever he completed a particularly challenging woodworking project. Just as we were finding our footing, an elaborate envelope arrived in the mail, an invitation that would set in motion events none of us could have anticipated. The invitation was printed on heavy cream cardstock, with gold embossing announcing the vow renewal ceremony and reception of Benjamin and Heather Wilson. Despite already being married for 8 years, they had decided to renew their vows in what the invitation described as a celebration of love and prosperity at the Grand Plaza Hotel, one of the most exclusive venues in the city. A handwritten note was tucked inside the envelope in Heather's elegant script. "Natalie, hi. We would be delighted if you, Daniel, and Jacob could attend our special day. Perhaps seeing how we have honored your father's legacy with our success will bring you some comfort in your current situation. Families should stick together after all." The thinly veiled condescension made my stomach turn. I placed the invitation on our kitchen counter, uncertain how to respond. When Daniel came home that evening, he immediately noticed the elaborate invitation. After reading Heather's note, his jaw tightened. "We are not going to this. It is just another opportunity for them to flaunt what they have taken from you and humiliate us." "I agree," I said, sliding the invitation into the recycling bin. "We will send our regrets." Later that night, Jacob came into the kitchen for a glass of water and spotted the edge of the invitation peeking from the bin. Curious, he pulled it out and read it carefully. "Are we going to Uncle Benjamin and Aunt Heather's party?" he asked the next morning at breakfast. "No, honey," I explained gently. "Dad and I think it might be uncomfortable for everyone." To my surprise, Jacob's expression grew serious. "I think we should go." Daniel and I exchanged glances. "Why would you want to attend, buddy?" Daniel asked. "You know how Andrew sometimes treats you at school." Jacob fidgeted with his spoon. "I have been working on a special project about family history for school. I want to give it to Uncle Benjamin and Aunt Heather as a gift." "That is very thoughtful," I said, touched by his generosity despite how they had treated us. "But we can send your gift without attending." No, Jacob insisted with unusual determination. I need to give it to them in person. It is important. Over the next few days, Jacob continued to press the issue, showing a level of conviction that was both surprising and intriguing. When I asked about this mysterious project, he would only say it was a video about what family really means, and that he had been working on it for months. Do you really think this is a good idea? I asked Daniel one night after Jacob had gone to bed. Being in that environment surrounded by their wealth and friends, who probably know nothing good about us. Daniel sighed. Normally I would say absolutely not. But I have never seen Jacob so determined about anything. Maybe this is important for his healing process too. Confronting the situation rather than avoiding it. What if they humiliate him? Or us, I worried. You know how Heather can be, especially with an audience. Then we leave immediately, Daniel said firmly. But maybe we should give Jacob the chance to do this. He has had so little control over everything that has happened. After much discussion, we decided to accept the invitation. I sent a brief polite RSVP and began the daunting task of figuring out what we would wear to an event where the hosts and guests would undoubtedly be dressed in designer outfits. I found a simple but elegant, navy blue dress on sale that could be dressed up with the pearl necklace my father had given me for my 30th birthday. Daniel still had his good suit from when we attended educational conferences. For Jacob, we splurged on a new dress shirt and tie, reasoning that he was growing so quickly he would need them eventually for school events anyway. As the date approached, Jacob spent increasing amounts of time in his room working on his mysterious project. I occasionally heard him recording himself speaking, but he kept the content secret even from us. His determination was both touching and concerning. What exactly was he planning? The night before the ceremony, Jacob asked me to sit on the edge of his bed during our usual goodnight routine. His expression was unusually solemn. "Mom, do you trust me?" he asked, his blue eyes searching mine. "Of course I do, sweetie," I replied, smoothing his hair. "Tomorrow at the party. I might do something that seems strange," he said carefully. "But I need you to trust me and not stop me. It is important." A flutter of anxiety passed through me. "Jacob, what are you planning?" He shook his head. "I cannot tell you. But I promise it is not bad. It is about the truth." The truth about what I pressed. "About family," he said simply. "About what Grandpa would have wanted." I studied my son's face, seeing determination and a wisdom that seemed beyond his 10 years. This was the child who had been called brainless by his own family members, yet who possessed an emotional intelligence that constantly amazed me. "Okay," I said finally. "I trust you. But if at any point I feel you are in a harmful situation, I am stepping in. That is the deal." He nodded solemnly. "Deal." That night I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. What had Jacob discovered? What was he planning? And would tomorrow bring closure, or just more pain to our already fractured family? As the morning dawned, I felt a strange mix of dread and curiosity. Daniel noticed my nervousness as we got dressed. "We can still back out," he offered, adjusting his tie. I shook my head, watching Jacob carefully pack his tablet and a small USB drive into his backpack. Jacob needs this for some reason. And maybe I do too. It is time to face Benjamin and Heather on their own turf. "Just remember," Daniel said, taking my hands in his, "whatever happens today, we have each other. That is what really matters." With those words of reassurance, we headed out to what would become the most unexpected and revealing family gathering of our lives. The Grand Plaza Hotel lived up to its name with its marble columns and crystal chandeliers, creating an atmosphere of opulence from the moment we entered the lobby. A tasteful sign directed guests to the Wilson Vow Renewal in the Grand Ballroom, where a photographer captured arrivals against a backdrop of cascading white orchids and gold accents. When we approached the entrance, the photographer seemed momentarily confused, as if uncertain whether to offer us the same treatment as the other guests. I felt Jacob squeeze my hand reassuringly as we continued past, pretending not to notice the slight. The ballroom was transformed into a scene from a luxury magazine spread. Elaborate floral arrangements towered from each table, which were adorned with gold chargers, fine china, and crystal stemware. A string quartet played softly in the corner, and waitstaff circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. "This must have cost a fortune," Daniel whispered, as we found our assigned table, notably positioned near the service entrance, far from the main table. I recognized few of the 100 or so guests, mostly Benjamin's business associates and Heather's social circle. The few family members present gave us awkward nods of acknowledgement, but made no effort to approach or engage. My mother Elizabeth was seated at the head table, elegant in a new designer dress, laughing with Heather's parents. Jacob seemed unfazed by our isolation, his eyes scanning the room with unusual intensity. He kept his backpack close, occasionally checking its contents, as if to reassure himself everything was still there. The ceremony itself was brief but lavish, with Heather in a gown that probably cost more than our annual rent. Benjamin spoke about building on family foundations to create a legacy of success, words that stung, given how he had essentially stolen that foundation. Not once during their vows or speeches did either of them mention my father, whose hard work and sacrifice had made their current lifestyle possible. During the cocktail hour that followed, we stood awkwardly near the edge of the room. I noticed several guests glancing our way, then whispering to each other. Clearly we were the subject of gossip. Jacob excused himself to use the restroom, taking his backpack with him. Daniel went to get us some water, leaving me momentarily alone. It was then that Heather approached, champagne flute in hand, wearing a practiced smile. "Natalie, I am so glad you could make it. What a lovely, accessible outfit." Her eyes flicked dismissively over my department store dress. "Congratulations, Heather. It is a beautiful ceremony," I replied, determined to maintain my dignity. "Yes, well, we wanted to celebrate properly now that the business is thriving. Benjamin has such a vision for expansion." She looked around conspiratorially before adding, "Much more ambitious than your father ever was. The company needed younger, more forward-thinking leadership." I bit my tongue, unwilling to take her bait. Dad built a solid foundation. I am sure he would be happy to see it continue. Speaking of continuing, Heather said, her voice taking on a syrupy quality as she noticed others watching our interaction. "We are so happy you could attend, despite your circumstances. In fact, since you are here, perhaps you could help us out." Before I could respond, she raised her voice slightly so those nearby could hear. "The catering staff is a bit overwhelmed, since you are experienced with more practical matters. Would you mind helping clear some of the tables? We would consider it your gift to us, since I imagine presents are difficult with your current budget constraints." I felt my face burn, as several nearby guests turned to watch the exchange. Before I could formulate a response that would not cause a scene, my mother approached champagne, clearly having loosened her usual restraint. "There you are, Natalie Elizabeth," said her voice carrying. "Always hiding in corners. You should be more like Heather, confident, successful." "Mom, I was just catching up with Heather," I said quietly, trying to diffuse the situation. Elizabeth looked at my simple dress and shook her head disapprovingly. "You could have made more effort for such an important occasion. And where is that child of yours? Probably hiding as usual." "Jacob is in the restroom," I replied, my chest tightening at her dismissive tone. Heather laughed lightly. "Natalie was just about to help the staff clear some tables. Perfect job for her, do not you think? And she could use that brainless child of hers to help. At least he would be good for something practical, since academics are clearly not his strength." Several guests nearby chuckled, emboldened by Heather's cruelty. I felt a surge of protective anger, but before I could respond, I saw Jacob standing just behind them, his backpack clutched tightly in his hands. From his expression, I knew he had heard everything. Daniel appeared at my side, having also overheard. "We should leave," he whispered, placing a protective hand on my back, To my surprise, Jacob stepped forward instead of retreating. "Actually, I have a gift for Uncle Benjamin and Aunt Heather," he announced, his voice clear despite a slight tremor. Heather's smile faltered slightly. "How sweet. You can leave it on the gift table, dear." "It is not that kind of gift," Jacob persisted. "It is a video I made about our family." Benjamin had now joined the group, placing a possessive arm around Heather's waist. "This is hardly the time, Jacob. We have a schedule to maintain." "It will only take a few minutes," Jacob insisted with a determination I had rarely seen in him. "I worked very hard on it." A few guests, curious about the exchange, encouraged Benjamin and Heather to let the boy present his gift. Perhaps not wanting to appear unkind in front of their audience, they reluctantly agreed. "Fine," Heather conceded, with an exaggerated sigh. 5 minutes then, back to our real celebration. Jacob approached the DJ booth with surprising confidence, speaking quietly to the man controlling the audio-visual equipment. The DJ nodded, looking slightly confused but willing to help. Minutes later, the large projection screen that had been showing tasteful photos of Benjamin and Heather lowered from the ceiling, and the room lights dimmed slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "the nephew of our celebrating couple has prepared a special video presentation as his gift. Please direct your attention to the screen." Daniel and I exchanged worried glances, having no idea what Jacob had created. As the video began, I held my breath, praying this would not result in further humiliation for my sensitive son. The screen illuminated with a simple title, "The Wilson Family Legacy: Truth and Remembrance." What followed left the entire room in stunned silence. The video began innocuously enough, with photos of my father and his furniture business through the years. But then it transitioned to a series of emails, text messages, and recorded phone conversations between Benjamin and Heather, dated before my father's death, plotting how they would contest the will and take control of the entire estate. "Just need to convince Mom that Dad was losing it," Benjamin's voice played clearly through the speakers in one recording. "You work on spreading some rumors about Natalie taking advantage. Between the two, we can get the whole thing invalidated." Another clip showed Heather speaking to someone off camera. "Elizabeth is easy to manipulate. She has always preferred Benjamin anyway. We just need to keep her comfortable, and she will back whatever story we create." The video continued with screenshots of doctored financial documents, the same ones I had discovered months earlier, with Benjamin and Heather discussing how to backdate them with my father's forged signature. Most damning was a recorded conversation where they mocked many of the guests currently in the room, describing them as useful idiots and walking checkbooks who would enhance their social standing. The ballroom erupted in gasps and murmurs as the evidence mounted. Some guests stood up abruptly. Others filmed the screen with their phones. Benjamin lunged toward the DJ booth, shouting for him to stop the video, but the damage was done. The truth was playing in high definition for everyone to see. I sat frozen, watching, as my son's careful compilation laid bare the extent of my brother's betrayal, not just of me, but of our father's memory and wishes. Jacob had somehow gathered more evidence than I had ever discovered, presenting it in a clear, undeniable narrative that no amount of denial could erase. As the final clip played, Benjamin laughing about how easy it had been to push Daniel out of his teaching position through a strategic conversation with a school board member, I felt Daniel's hand tighten around mine. The video ended with a simple message: "Grandpa Robert always said the truth will set you free. This is for you, Grandpa." The lights came up on a room in chaos. Benjamin was at the DJ booth, attempting to confiscate Jacob's USB drive. Heather stood rigid with shock, her perfectly made-up face contorted in fury. Guests were standing, some heading for the exits, others confronting Benjamin with angry questions. In the midst of the uproar, Jacob returned to our table, his expression both relieved and anxious. "I did what Grandpa would have wanted, right, Mom?" he asked quietly. I pulled him into a tight hug, overwhelmed with a complex mix of emotions: pride in my son's courage, shock at the extent of the evidence he had gathered, and a strange sense of vindication that the truth had finally come to light. "How did you find all this?" Daniel asked, his voice low with amazement. When we visited Grandma at the house last Christmas, Jacob explained. I left my book in Grandpa's old office, and when I went to get it, I heard Uncle Benjamin and Aunt Heather arguing about some documents in Grandpa's computer. After they left, I checked the computer. They never changed his password. It was still my birthday. He paused. I know it was wrong to look at private stuff, but once I saw what they did to you and Dad, I kept looking. I found everything. The emails, the recordings from Grandpa's old dictation machine that they forgot about. As the chaos continued around us, Elizabeth made her way to our table, her face ashen. For the first time since my father's death, she looked at me, really looked at me, with clarity in her eyes. Is this true? She whispered. Did Benjamin forge Robert's signature? Did he lie about everything? Before I could answer, a distinguished older man approached our table. I recognized him as Harold Peters, one of my father's oldest friends, and a partner at a prominent law firm, who had been invited as a courtesy to my father's memory. Mrs. Wilson, he addressed my mother formally. I believe we have some urgent matters to discuss regarding your late husband's estate. And Natalie, he turned to me. I would very much like to speak with you, and your exceptionally resourceful son as well. As we stood to follow him to a quieter location, I caught sight of Benjamin and Heather, huddled with their attorney. In a corner, their celebration thoroughly derailed. The perfectly orchestrated display of their success and social triumph had crumbled under the weight of the truth revealed by the very child they had dismissed as brainless. In that moment, despite the chaos and uncertainty of what would follow, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The truth was finally out, and whatever happened next, we would face it with the integrity my father had always valued above all else. The elegant ballroom, which just minutes earlier had been a showcase of wealth and social standing, descended into chaos. Guests gathered in small clusters, whispering furiously while glancing at Benjamin and Heather, who remained huddled with their attorney in the corner. Others were already heading for the exits, cell phones pressed to their ears as they spread the news of the scandalous revelation. Harold Peters, my father's old friend and attorney, guided us to a small conference room adjacent to the ballroom. This might be more appropriate for our discussion, he said, closing the door behind us, muffling the commotion outside. Elizabeth sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I do not understand, she whispered. Benjamin told me Natalie had been manipulating Robert, that the will did not reflect his true wishes. Mrs. Wilson, Harold said gently but firmly, I have known Robert for over 30 years. He was of completely sound mind when he created that will. He was explicit about wanting his children to share equally in his legacy. But the papers Benjamin showed me, she began, were almost certainly falsified, Harold finished. Based on what we just saw, there appears to be substantial evidence of fraud. Jacob sat quietly beside me, looking simultaneously proud and nervous. I placed my arm around his shoulders, overwhelmed with pride at his courage. How did you gather all this evidence? Jacob, Harold asked, his tone respectful rather than condescending. Jacob explained in detail how he had discovered the first clues during our Christmas visit, then systematically explored my father's computer and backup files. Grandpa always kept recordings of his important phone calls for business records. Uncle Benjamin and Aunt Heather did not know about the automatic cloud backup system Grandpa set up. I found everything there. And you compiled this all yourself? Harold asked, clearly impressed. Yes, sir, Jacob nodded. I am not good at reading, but I am really good with computers and audio-visual stuff. My teacher helped me with the editing software for my history project, and I used those skills for this. The door opened abruptly, as Benjamin burst in, his face flushed with rage. What the hell was that? That video was full of manipulated content and private information obtained illegally. Harold stood, his professional demeanor hardening. Benjamin, I strongly advise you not to make accusations right now. From what I observed, there appears to be evidence of serious legal impropriety on your part. This is absurd, Benjamin sputtered. He is a child with a learning disability. No one will believe this nonsense. Actually came a new voice from the doorway. I found it extremely credible. We turned to see Judith Blackwell, one of the city's most prominent business leaders, and a major client of my father's company, now Benjamin's. Hoplin. Her expression was severe as she entered the room. I came today out of respect for Robert, she said coolly. He was a man of impeccable integrity who built his business on trust and quality. What I just witnessed suggests his son lacks those qualities entirely. Benjamin paled. Judith, I can explain. This is a family misunderstanding that has been grossly exaggerated. Save it, she cut him off. I have already texted my assistant to begin transitioning our contracts to another vendor. I suspect others will do the same. She turned to me. Natalie, I did not know the circumstances of your father's estate. Robert always spoke highly of you. I am sorry for what has happened. As Judith left, Benjamin seemed to deflate the implications of losing major business clients sinking in. Heather appeared in the doorway, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The Harrises and Johnsons just canceled their orders, she hissed at Benjamin. This is a disaster. Elizabeth stood shakily. I need to understand exactly what has happened. Benjamin, did you forge your father's signature on company documents? Benjamin's silence was damning. Did you deliberately spread lies about Natalie to gain control of the entire estate? She continued, her voice strengthening. Mom, you do not understand the pressure, Benjamin finally said. The business needed aggressive expansion. Dad was too conservative. Natalie had no interest or experience in the company. It made sense for me to take control. That was not your decision to make, Elizabeth replied, a new firmness in her tone. That was for your father to decide, and he chose to divide his legacy equally. We can discuss this later in private, Benjamin insisted, eyeing Harold nervously. I think not, Harold interjected. As a friend of Robert's and an officer of the court, I cannot ignore evidence of potential fraud and forgery. Natalie, would you be willing to pursue this legally? All eyes turned to me. After months of suppressing my anger and hurt, the vindication of this moment was powerful. Yet something held me back from immediately agreeing. Before I answer that, I said carefully, I want to be clear about what I want. I turned to Benjamin. I do not want to destroy you or the business Dad built. I do not even want the full share of the inheritance anymore. Benjamin looked suspicious. Then, what do you want? An acknowledgement of the truth. A public apology to Jacob for how you have treated him. And... I paused, feeling a sudden wave of emotion. Dad's pocket watch. The one his father gave him. That is all I want from the estate. A watch, that is it, Heather interjected incredulously. After all this drama. The watch was supposed to go to Jacob, I explained. Dad told me he wanted his grandson to have it when he turned 18. It is not about the monetary value. Benjamin seemed to consider this, clearly calculating the cost-benefit analysis of a quick resolution versus protracted legal battles and further business damage. And if I agree to these terms, he asked cautiously. Harold cleared his throat. I would still recommend a proper legal review of all documents related to Robert's estate and business transition. There are potential criminal implications that cannot simply be negotiated away. However, he continued, if Natalie does not wish to pursue maximum penalties or full recovery of assets, that would certainly influence how aggressively these matters are investigated. The tension in the room was palpable as Benjamin faced the consequences of his actions. Outside, we could hear the reception continuing to disintegrate as guests departed and staff began prematurely clearing tables. Elizabeth suddenly reached for my hand, her eyes filling with tears. Natalie, I owe you an apology. I believed what I wanted to believe, because it was easier. I did not want to think Benjamin would lie to me, that he would dishonor his father's wishes this way. Her words released something in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. We all lost Dad, I said quietly. I think we just handled our grief in different ways. Jacob, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "Uncle Benjamin, you always said I was not smart because I cannot read well. But Grandpa told me being smart is not just about reading. It is about seeing the truth and standing up for what is right." His simple wisdom hung in the air, a powerful reminder of what truly mattered. Not wealth or status, but integrity and truth. The very values my father had lived by and tried to instill in both his children. Daniel, who had been a steady, supportive presence throughout, finally added his thoughts. "We are not interested in revenge. We just want to move forward with our lives, honoring Robert's real legacy, his values, not just his possessions." Benjamin looked between us, perhaps seeing for the first time the strength in our family unit despite our financial struggles. Something shifted in his expression, not full remorse, but perhaps the beginning of recognition. "I will get you the watch," he said finally, "and I will make a public statement clearing Natalie's name regarding Dad's will and estate." It was not everything, but it was a start. As we prepared to leave the imploding celebration, I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, relief, and a strange sense of freedom. The truth had finally emerged, not through my efforts, but through the determination and courage of my remarkable son, who had been underestimated by everyone, except those who truly knew him. As we walked out through the lobby, Jacob squeezed my hand. "Did I do okay, Mom?" I knelt down to his level, looking into his intelligent, sensitive eyes. "You did more than okay. You stood up for the truth in a way that would have made your grandfather incredibly proud. In a way that makes me proud beyond words." We stepped out into the evening air, leaving behind the artificial opulence of the reception and walking toward something more valuable, a future built on truth, integrity, and the real meaning of family legacy. 2 years can change everything, or perhaps more accurately, 2 years can reveal the truth of everything. As I sit in our new backyard watching Jacob practice for his science presentation, I marvel at how far we have come since that fateful wedding reception. The legal aftermath of Jacob's revelation was both swift and comprehensive. Harold Peters, true to his word, led a thorough investigation into Benjamin's business dealings and manipulation of our father's estate. While Benjamin avoided criminal charges by agreeing to a settlement, the financial and social repercussions were substantial. Many clients severed ties with the company, unwilling to do business with someone whose integrity had been so publicly compromised. Within 6 months, Benjamin was forced to sell one of the new store locations to keep the original business afloat. Heather's aspirations as a lifestyle influencer crumbled as her carefully cultivated image was tarnished by the scandal. Their marriage, built partly on ambition and material success, began showing cracks under the pressure of diminished circumstances. As for us, we did not seek to reclaim the full inheritance that should have been mine. Instead, we accepted a modest settlement that allowed us to purchase a small but comfortable home in a good school district. Daniel was reinstated at his former teaching position with back pay after the school board learned of Benjamin's interference in his career. The most significant change, however, came in our family relationships. Elizabeth, my mother, faced the painful truth of how she had allowed herself to be manipulated. Her initial apology was just the beginning of a long, sometimes difficult journey toward reconciliation. She now lives in a small guest house on our property, spending her days helping Jacob with his projects and slowly rebuilding our relationship one conversation at a time. "Grandma, can you hold this part steady?" Jacob calls from his workbench, where he is putting the finishing touches on a model renewable energy system for his science fair. At 12, Jacob has blossomed. His dyslexia is still a challenge, but with proper support and accommodations, he has become an exceptional student, particularly in science and engineering. The boy, once cruelly labeled brainless, was recently accepted into a specialized STEM program for gifted students. Elizabeth carefully steadies the small wind turbine, while Jacob connects the wiring. "Your grandfather would have loved seeing this," she tells him. "He always said you had special gifts." "I know," Jacob replies with a small smile. "I remember." On our mantelpiece sits my father's pocket watch, restored and functioning a tangible connection to the man whose values eventually triumphed. Jacob often takes it down, running his fingers over the engraving on the back. Time reveals truth. An inscription that proved more prophetic than any of us could have imagined. Perhaps most surprising has been the gradual transformation in my relationship with Benjamin. 6 months after the wedding incident, he arrived at our door alone without Heather. He looked diminished somehow, the brash confidence replaced by something more genuine. "I have been seeing a therapist," he told me, after we had settled uncomfortably in our living room, trying to understand why I did what I did. It was not an immediate reconciliation. Trust, once broken so thoroughly, cannot be quickly repaired, but it was a beginning. Over the months that followed, Benjamin made efforts to understand Jacob's learning challenges, even funding a scholarship at his school for children with dyslexia. Last Christmas, for the first time since our father died, we shared a meal as a family. Not at the grand house Benjamin had claimed as his own, that he had sold it months earlier, moving to a more modest home, but at our table. The conversation was sometimes stilted, the history between us impossible to fully set aside, but it was a step toward healing. Heather and Benjamin have since separated, another casualty of foundations built on false values. Benjamin now runs a significantly smaller version of our father's business, focusing on quality craftsmanship rather than aggressive expansion. He occasionally asks Jacob for design ideas, recognizing the spatial brilliance my son possesses. As for me, I have found unexpected fulfillment in a new role as an advocate for children with learning differences. My experience with Jacob and the school system's initial failure to support him properly led me to create a parent resource network that has now helped dozens of families navigate similar challenges. The inheritance I once fought for, and then surrendered, has been replaced by something more valuable, the knowledge that my father's true legacy lives on, not in furniture or financial assets, but in the values we now strive to uphold. Daniel emerges from the house, carrying a tray of lemonade. "How is the future Nobel Prize winner doing with his project?" he asks, setting the tray on our patio table. "Almost finished," Jacob calls back, his focus unwavering from his work. As we sit together in the warm afternoon sunlight, I reflect on the strange journey that brought us here. When I walked away from my inheritance 3 years ago, I thought I was surrendering something precious. In reality, I was making space for something far more valuable to emerge. My father often told me that our choices reveal our true character far more than our circumstances do. In choosing peace over conflict, integrity over material gain, I found a different kind of wealth. And in allowing Jacob to stand up for truth in his own unique way, we discovered the most valuable inheritance of all, the courage to live according to our deepest values, even when the cost seems too high. Sometimes the biggest inheritance is not what is left in a will, but the lessons we learn about who truly matters in our lives. The pocket watch on our mantle keeps perfect time, but the most precious gift my father left us cannot be held in our hands, only in our hearts. Have you ever had to choose between fighting for what is rightfully yours and finding peace by letting go? What would you have done in my situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes walking away is not giving up, but moving forward. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that the most valuable legacies are not measured in dollars, but in the lives we touch and the truth we honor.